At the beginning of 1945, the USSR wanted a new heavy tank capable of withstanding fire from the German 128mm Jagdtiger cannon, at the time the most powerful anti-tank gun in the world. The USSR wasn't the only country during World War II to see how advanced the German tanks and guns were, or how effective they were. The arms race had begun, and one the world has never seen. With sights set on both conventional and nuclear arms, the race was on to see who could build the best in class of either. Today we will be focusing on the USSR's conventional arms, specifically the IS-7 program. The USSR had produced the T-34 en masse during the war, and great ideas and upgrades were put into effect, such as the T-34-85. The KV series also saw action, with the KV-1 and KV-2 being produced. Since the KV series was the heavy tank that won the war, the USSR needed something that would be able to have the best of both worlds, armor and a big gun. The Soviets took notes when engaged against the Germans, seeing not only the Tiger I and Tiger II, but also the Jagdtiger and Emil platforms. The idea of super heavy tanks was on the minds of the Soviet designers after finding the chassis for the E-100 and Maus, so they knew what would have been in store for them if the war had continued. The German wonder weapons, as they are known today, laid the groundwork for what was to come. Now it was time to pursue the idea of a Soviet homegrown super heavy tank that would outmatch all of its rivals. Enter the IS-7. The IS-7 is the heaviest Soviet tank ever built. Weighing in at 68 tons, the IS-7 was a super heavy tank that boasted armor and a massive gun. There were multiple different prototypes, all built under the name IS-7. The IS-4, the Object 260, the Object 252/253, otherwise known as the IS-6, Object 257, Object 252U, Object 258, and 259. The Soviets brought in more than 20 institutes and scientific institutions for the development of the new tank. Due to its weight, the engine was required to produce between 900 and 1200 horsepower. On April 7, 1945, Soviet command issued requirements for the IS-7 program. It had to have all of the following: a 122mm gun, muzzle velocity of 1,000 meters per second, 2-part ammunition, and a rate of fire of 4 rounds per minute. These were the basic parameters that were required for the build. The Kirov's design bureau of the tank plant was to take the lead on the build. The tank had to be state-of-the-art with technology as well as withstanding the heaviest of incoming fire. There was a lot of trial and error, failure, and success. Crew. The IS-7 had a crew of 5: driver, commander, gunner, and 2 loaders. The driver sat dead center under the main gun. The commander was positioned to the right of the main gun. The gunner was to the left. The loaders played more than one role, not only making sure that heavy rounds made it into the gun, but they were also responsible for controlling the machine guns on the front and after the tank. Latest technology. The IS-7 had a novelty built in to assist the crew and make it easier for them to stay focused on targets rather than internal issues that may occur. The automatic fire extinguishing system. The system consisted of sensors and fire extinguisher cylinders located in the places prone to possible fires and worked when the temperature rose to between 100 and 1100 degrees Celsius. It was designed to be engaged up to 3 times. The Design Bureau implemented test benches necessary for testing the engine cooling system's ejector, the Caterpillar's rubber metal joints, track rollers, and more. This led to non-stop testing of speed characteristics, getting the IS-7 up to a boasted 60 kilometers per hour, the fastest of any tank of the time for such a heavy machine. The final design was armed with a stabilized 130mm auto-loaded cannon, 8 machine guns, infrared scopes, and up to 300mm of armor. The USSR had never produced a tank this big and probably never will again. The driver and commander each had an infrared sight, one up to 50 meters, the other up to 120 meters. This allowed for night battle and night positioning without the use of headlights, making it a more deadly adversary. The infrared technology was taken from the German Wehrmacht's STG-44 assault rifle, primarily intended for night use against Soviet forces on the Eastern Front and enhanced for tank use. Armor. A number of tests were done for the armor as well to provide it with the maximum thickness, keeping the crew safe from anything available on the battlefield. Test firings were done with the Soviet BL-3 and D-25T guns and German Pak-43 88mm and Pak-44 128mm. These tests prompted an upgrade in hull and turret thickness. This made the upper hull 150mm thick. The frontal turret was increased to 240 to 350 millimeters, and the side was 185 to 240 millimeters thick. The belly of the tank only had 20 millimeters of armor, and the back of the tank had 50 to 100 millimeters of thickness. The lower sheets of the sides were bent, increasing resistance to mines and projectiles. The Design Bureau had finally achieved its goal of making the tank almost impenetrable from anything that was currently in production at the time. The pike nose had an excellent ballistic profile, but created reduced strength in the welds and some manufacturing difficulties. With the addition of up-armored areas, the total weight went from 65 to 68 tons respectively. In a hold-down position, the tank proved to be impenetrable against 128mm and also 130mm rounds fired against it due to significant turret armor and the rounded turret shape. Armament. The IS-7 needed to be the dominant tank on the battlefield, and with the smaller caliber Soviet guns tested like the S-26, the Design Bureau needed another solution. Enter the S-70 130mm cannon. The projectile was a 33.4 kilogram armor-piercing round that had an initial velocity of 900 meters per second and could pierce 163 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters, and 143 millimeters of armor pierced at 2,000 meters. The muzzle brake was also changed from a slot design to a muzzle brake with small holes that assisted in releasing the gas from the barrel better. The tank could hold up to 30 rounds of ammunition. The initial autoloaders failed, so the development of a small electric chain ramming mechanism was needed. The tank also received a fire control device to stabilize the sight prism, regardless of the gun's position or the terrain the tank went over. The tank was surrounded by an embellishment of machine guns. The gun mask had a KPV-44 directly over the main gun, and an RP-46 to each side of the gun. Two more RP-46s were mounted on the fenders, while two more were mounted on the aft sides of the turret to enable rear fire. All had remote control firing. This enabled the guns to fire at both air and ground targets without leaving the tank, keeping the crew from being exposed at all. Engine. The Design Bureau tested the TD-30 engine, and it showed numerous shortcomings. These shortcomings proved the necessity of a better, more reliable engine that could withstand pushing this 68-ton beast around and giving it the speed and horsepower it needed to get into the fight. The Bureau decided to use the M50, a 12-cylinder diesel engine used on high-speed marine boats. This engine brought a whopping 1,050 horsepower to the tank, lower power than the TD-30, but the reliability made up for the power loss. The top achievable speed was recorded at 60 kilometers per hour, giving it a power-to-weight ratio of 15.4 horsepower per ton, which is superior to most main battle tanks of today. Termination. Although the IS-7 was never mass-produced, or even went into production, the Design Bureau gained very valuable experiences going through the paces to get the IS-7 into fruition. On later model Soviet tanks, many components and processes were used that came from the IS-7 program testing. The real nail in the coffin for the IS-7 that led to its demise was the use of kinetic shells that were being used by the West, which could defeat the armor of the IS-7 from typical distances of a normal tank battle in the early 1980s. The gun is still something that is at the modern level of today's tanks, though most are 120 millimeters. The mobility is another indicator of having a modern twist on something so old, being comparable to the German Leopard 2 tank with speeds up to 65 kilometers per hour and frontal turret armor of 350 to 400 millimeters thick. The IS-7 was ahead of its time and a shame to never see produced in numbers. The level of firepower and armor on the IS-7 was very similar to the NATO tanks in the 1960s, such as the US Army M60A1 or the British Chieftain. On the other hand, its main gun and fire controls suffered from the constraints imposed by the 1940s technology. These limitations also denied them the accuracy of later tank guns. In the end, the IS-7 was scrapped for a lighter, heavy tank, the T-10 or IS-8. This would be the last of the Soviet super heavy tanks, as they were phasing them out for main battle tanks, which were going to be more maneuverable, faster, similar guns, and lighter. An IS-7 prototype, the only remaining example, is still preserved on display at the Kubinka Tank Museum to this day. Thanks for watching War Machine. Please comment, like, and subscribe. Thank you very much.